Good afternoon and welcome to After Hours. Joining me today is Deborah Strong, not Storm.
Strong.
She is an artist, but for me, I call you the Bird Lady. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Some people don't like birds. Some particular birds. Crows get a bad rap, you know. And some people are afraid of birds. What is your attraction to birds?
Well, I like all creatures. It doesn't matter whether they have feathers or fur or hooves or scales or whatever. They're all wonderful in my eyes. And when I was a little girl, I spent a summer with my sister who was living in Montreal with her husband. And they introduced me to bird watching. I was about 12. And I really got into it for a while. Then I kind of drifted away and did other things. And, my art has always been influenced by whatever animals are in my life, right? So since I've come back to Maine, I've come back to the birds, really. And they've become a big part of my life again. They're what's around me all the time. So,
Yes,
and I feel a real appreciation for the fact that when I woke up as a little girl, the bird song was deafening in the mornings. And now, it's not so deafening. It's a thinner song. There's fewer birds. We've lost 2/3 of them in my lifetime. So I really now feel that they are of super importance. We really have to cherish them.
Mm-hmm. What were you like as a child, speaking of your childhood, and talk about your farm life?
Well, I grew up in a pretty rural environment out in the Fraser Valley. And my brother and my sister were very much older than me, so I was basically on my own most of the time. And I was one of those kids who likes to be alone, and I would wander around in the woods with, the dog or the cat or whoever came with me, and be alone a lot in nature. So, again, I feel like I've come full circle. I'm back to that similar life as an older adult now. But I grew up in a small farm. We had horses and chickens and ducks and cows and dogs and cats, and I had guinea pigs and rabbits, and it was a pretty rural life. Small farm. Yeah.
Part of farm life, I think, can be, for me, it would be hard. I don't eat meat. And I could not bring myself to, I came from, in the past, other family members who had farms, and they always had their pet cow in there. Was there a hard part of having the farm life?
The animals came and went, but I don't know I think I might have been in denial. We always raised a steer for the freezer every summer, and I knew that was part of our life, so you didn't bond too tightly with the steer. The rest went away to market again. Right. The chickens, we had them for eggs mainly. We didn't eat a lot of the poultry. It was a small farm. The ducks controlled the pests in the garden, and again, we ate the eggs. So we weren't a high production farm by any means. Mostly we did a lot of gardening, and like I said, the steer came and went, but
I'm going to go to your studio, and I didn't really ask you about the picture at the time, but up in the top you have a picture of a group of ducks on the water.
Oh, the mallards. Well, that's from the Rifle Bird Sanctuary in Ladner. So you go there, and the mallards just swarm you because everybody feeds them. So you end up standing with this sea of mallards all around your feet. And so that's my experience of that.
And you saved mallards. Talk about that.
I've picked up clutches of baby ducks and goslings and squirrels and anything that needs help. I've picked them up and delivered them to the local wildlife rescue.
Or they've come to you.
I seem to find them. So, yeah.
And talk about, you worked or helped out with critter care?
Oh, critter care. Yeah, I did some work with critter care wildlife rescue in Langley when I was living there. It was mostly fundraising initiatives. And I illustrated a children's book for them about Bradley the bear and Olivia the otter and their day out. And I also did a limited edition print of their lynx, Hoover, who was living there at the time. He was their mascot. So I did a drawing of him, and we shared the proceeds from that to help them.
So do you think artists are born or made? I mean, maybe it's not a 1-2 answer.
You know, there's a saying that goes, the art is nothing without the talent, but the artist is nothing without the work. So you start with the talent, but if you don't put the work in, you don't get anywhere. So I don't know how that relates to what you just said to me, but I think it means that, you know, yeah, you can have a lot of talent, you can start as an artist, but you may not ever get anywhere. Whereas sometimes people just fall into it later in life. They must have an inherent sort of ability or talent or just some little spark that brings it to them later. I don't know. I mean, my life journey has been one of an artist. I've been doing this since I could hold a pencil, so it's been very much a part of my entire life. But I know that's not true for everyone. We're all different. Yeah.
Do you think we all have, I guess I'm using the word artist, but like potentially have that creativity? Because sometimes it's stopped. You know what I mean? Like in
often,
math, reading, writing,
true.
arithmetic.
And you know, every artist I have known has had to make a living doing something else. They've been accountants, they've been teachers, they've been this, they've been that, right? I mean, we all have to pay the bills. And art is not the easiest way to do that. So it's a very few that can realize that dream right from the get-go. I worked as a graphic designer for years and years and years. But the art was always part of what I did. I was lucky. I worked in a creative profession, and I also kept my art practice going through all of that. But
is it hard to keep the art
practice? It is. The balance becomes tricky because the art requires a real devotion and a certain kind of energy. And if you're drained at the end of the day, it's hard to pick up the pencil again and keep going. So yeah.
When you were a graphic artist, did you have a studio? Did you try and like set aside time?
I didn't have a studio space until much later. It just life was such that I didn't. I had a kind of a corner. I had a corner, or I had an extra bedroom, or I had something. But it wasn't until much later that I actually had a dedicated studio space. But I don't believe you need a studio. You just need the drive. And you need a little corner that you can call your own somewhere.
So when you were working, I had this conversation with a fellow who really, really loved jazz music and playing jazz. And we had this conversation just the other day, and he said, you know, I think he might have a bit of regret in his life. And he said, why is it who are those people? Why is it they just do it? They just go with that. Can you talk a bit about that? And maybe when the change happened for you?
I don't really know how people just go with it. I think our lives just unfold in a certain direction. I think some people are able to have that peace stay active in them, and other people, they just can't manage it. I think we have the spark, and I think if we have the spark, even if we drift away from it for a while, we're going to come back to it. I wanted to do a fine arts degree when I was really young. Right, I went straight from high school into doing a fine arts diploma, and I intended to go on and do a fine arts degree. And when I spoke to the academic advisor, they said, "Oh no, you can't do that. How will you ever get a job? You need to be a teacher." And so I did about a year of courses leading up to that, and I thought, wait a minute, this isn't what I want. And I just dropped out, and I never realized that wish I had to do my fine arts degree. I still haven't managed to do it. So we can get derailed really early on just by influences and advice and circumstances. Yeah, but if we have the spark, we keep going.
But you did go to art school.
I did the 2-year diploma. Yeah, right out of high school, I went straight into a 2-year diploma at what is now University of the Fraser Valley. It was great. I had the good fortune to study drawing and painting under the 2 head faculty members at the time who were classically trained artists that had moved here from Eastern Europe. And they were very dedicated to the fundamentals of drawing. So I think that has served me very well through my life, that early grounding.
When I was in high school, my radicalism wasn't like some kids, you know, drinking and partying and all that. Mine was sort of feeling stuff going around me and reacting to it, not necessarily consciously. And I had an art teacher, and he wasn't doing this to me, but one of my mates in the class had done a clay sculpture. And he went over to it, the art teacher, and looked at it, picked it up, and squished it. And I quit going to class that day. What influences have you had?
And if you hadn't had that experience, who knows where you would have gone, right? We can be really harmed by a misadventure like that when we're early on in our development. I didn't have a lot of experiences like that. I did have a couple of instructors, because my passion has always been animals. And I have worked in colored pencil all my life, right from high school. I just kept going with it. And I can remember one particular instructor saying, "You can't do that. You've got to change over to some more legitimate art form. And you can't just draw animals. You've got to, find something else." Didn't. I kept doing both, and that's been my life.
Talk about that. Wasn't there an instructor? Okay, so why do you pick this medium? It was just there in you. Talk about the instructor who allowed you to do that instead of...
Well, I believe a good instructor sees the potential in an artist and doesn't try to redirect it. They try to nurture it. So those same instructors I was talking about, the faculty heads at the art program I went through, they never attempted to redirect me. It wasn't in their makeup. It was all about teaching me more, helping me learn, helping me develop, helping me find my own way. And I believe that's what good instruction is all about, right?
So what did you do instead of using paint? I found that interesting.
Right, yeah. Well, I did a couple of things. I know I had to take painting classes. It was part of the curriculum. But I managed to convince them that I should be able to use pastel crayons instead of paint and brushes, and that was fine. I still learned about using color. I still learned all that I needed to learn about working with color and working with textures and working the technical aspects of it, and I used pastel crayons. So.
Well, it was interesting because after being at your studio, I thought of a neighbor of mine when I was a very little girl. And he had a studio, and I don't even know Dr. Bollier, and he worked in dentistry at the university. But that's where I was first introduced to art, and he taught me how to do still life with chalk and all the formal, and it was really great.
It's so interesting, isn't it? When your eyes get open to perspective and contrast and all those valuable fundamental elements that we work with.
And he polished rocks, which was really interesting as well.
Well, the other thing I've done a lot of is painting on silk, right?
Yes.
And that does involve a brush, but it also has a very strong drawing element. And it gave me this real rush to work with the fabric and the textures and watch the dye flow through the fibers. But I still got to draw. I still had the drawing piece as part of the way I used it. So, yeah.
Tell me about your horse.
My horse. Well, I had a horse for almost 30 years. I'd had a series of ponies growing up, each kind of lethal in some way. And I think my parents were really deathly afraid I was going to be murdered by one of these ponies. So when I got to be about, 13 or 14, my dad said, "We need to get you a real horse." So off we went, and we got this beautiful horse whose picture is here somewhere.
Behind us.
Yeah, his name was Duke, and he came into my life. He was 2 and I was 14, and we kind of learned from each other. And
did you get like horse lessons or anything like that,
No,
or you just did that on
I did it on my own. We rode and rode and rode, all over the countryside, here, there, and everywhere, and over hill and dale. If I had 10 minutes spare in the day, I went for a quick ride. That's how it was. I was very close to that horse. We were very tight. And I grew up, I left home, the horse went with me. He went to different boarding stables here and there over the years.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he was a good boy. We were very close.
Tell me about your geese. I had a goose,
the geese,
and I like your geese.
Those two, well, I like birds with wattles, that leathery, wattly face. I'm always attracted to them. So I saw these 2 geese at a country fair in Langley. And so I took, photo of these beautiful geese. And then when I was working on the art piece, I posed them together because they have these graceful necks. And I thought, well, this is all nice, but it's not quite right. And I thought, what do geese do? How do they roll? And I thought about their role in the farmyard. Because we had geese when I was a child, and then of course they ate all the bugs and guarded the property. So I thought about them in that role, and I added the cabbage butterflies, so that it would give the context to the work that these are working animals that help us control pests. And that piece, it's won a couple of awards. It was published in a book. It's been one of my sort of signature art pieces over the years. Yeah.
I liked your little rectangular pictures of the little
birds and the very, very, tall and narrow space. Yeah, I liked working with that shape. It just gave more energy to the birds themselves. Yeah, just mixed it up a bit.
So did you pick certain birds for that? All tiny birds,
Yeah,
obviously.
they're all little birds. And of course, I gather my material when I'm out walking and I see things and I take pictures and I go back to the studio and I think about it. And every so often I have another moment where I see one that's going to work in that format. I took some photos of a tree swallow the other day, just on this lovely piece of arbutus that hung down very vertically, and the bird is perched on it, and I can just see it working nicely to be interpreted into one of those drawings. Yeah.
And tell me about your turkey vulture picture, because I asked a question about it too. We'll get to that
after. Turkey vulture. Well, I used to, one summer when I was on the island here, before I moved here permanently, I was down at the beach a lot, early in the morning. I'd go down there around dawn. And there was an old dead tree that the turkey vultures would all roost in. And so I'd be wandering down the beach and they'd be, right here. I'd see them in the mornings. So that's where that piece originated. And that was a young bird.
Yeah, because I asked you,
he doesn't look quite grown up
red?
yet. No, he's not quite there yet, or she. But yeah, and I have engraved on the branch he's sitting on. You probably didn't notice this.
I didn't notice it.
It says I heart V. So I love vultures because they're not a very well loved bird.
No, but they have.
They perform
a good
work,
service.
And they're very endangered worldwide. Very endangered. So we really...
I sometimes worry about them, like how many carcasses could you find? And I'm not sure of their...
I think they're pretty opportunistic birds, but they have the problem of eating, just like the eagles do. They'll eat animals that have been killed with lead shot, and then they get poisoned by the lead. Yeah.
Owls.
Owls. What about
when I went saw your showing at the cafe, it was the owl that I really liked, and it was gone
the barred owl.
Yeah,
that was from down around Bennett Bay here. He was sitting in a tree one day, and just as not much further away than we are, he was just there. So, yeah, hiding in plain sight, I call it, because they're so well camouflaged. I don't even know how I saw him. He was just there.
Because they're watching you. That's how that's the times I've seen them, they've been staring.
Yeah,
and so,
they're watching everything. I had a young one hanging around my place last summer. I see him every day. He was catching garter snakes down in my field. And I got a picture of him one day with a snake hanging out of his beak. But he was there every day. I felt like he was, part of the family.
That's
right?
Nice.
Yeah, it's great. I love seeing an owl. Seems special, right, to see an owl?
Yeah. Tell me about
that little guy.
Owl.
Well, that's on a fence post right behind my house. And at dusk, the barred owls are particularly active. So I just saw him flit past my window, and I went outside, and there he was, posing on the top of that fence post.
And what is it on? Like, how did you make that decision?
This is done with pencil. I've been experimenting using pencil on, instead of using it on paper, which traditionally I've always done, I'm using a clay-coated piece of masonite. And in that case, it's mounted on a panel as well, a cradle panel. But it means I don't have to frame it under glass. I can varnish it and just present it as it is, which is nice because you don't have that barrier of the glass between the art and the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It also kind of makes it more like a painting in a way.
It does, very much
Actually,
so. Yeah, the one you had noticed at Shavasana, that was done on clay. I think that's the first one I had done on the clay board.
Oh, okay.
I think that was the first one or second one. And yeah, you don't know it's pencil at all because of the varnish. Yeah.
Well, quite frankly, your artwork, you don't know it's pencil at all. That's what's wonderful.
True.
You know. Tell me about the little blackbird. Well, it's not a blackbird. Tell me what
the
kind of
Oropendula. That's a crested Oropendula, and they make these wonderful dangling nests, and they're inherent to South America, and I saw that one in the Caribbean. And they have this couple of yellow tail feathers, so they're a black bird, but when they fly, you get this flash of yellow. They're beautiful birds. Yeah, kind of like a jay, but a bit bigger, almost between a jay and a crow. You know.
Oh, so they have that smartness too.
They're quite. I think so. But they nest in these congregations where you'll see a tree and it has 10 of these dangling nests hanging from it. And the birds, I think they work together to
like
protect
crows,
it, right? Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, they're very interesting birds. Yeah.
And then the bird above.
The little palm tanager. Yeah, that was from a trip to South America. I was in Guyana one year. Wonderful experience. And the little palm tanagers were there. I also saw things like toucans and
what are toucans? I don't even know.
like the Fruit Loops bird with the long beak.
Yes. Fruit Loops bird. Oh no! What did they do to us?
Well, anyway, I managed to see one there. I was so excited. And that's where the palm tanagers were. Yeah, yeah. And you can see by that drawing, they're so perfectly integrated into their environment. This little green bird among the green fronds, you wouldn't know it was there if it didn't move. Mm-hmm.
When did you make the decision that you weren't going to work in graphic art or graphic work? And then I think you did restorative justice.
Yeah, that was kind of a transitional time. I was working in graphic design full-time, very intense, commuting, 3 hours a day in my car, and I had no energy. And I got to be in my late 30s, and I think it was around the time I turned 40, I thought, I didn't need to change this up. This is too hard. I'm not getting any of my own art done. I'm commuting so much. So my husband was a conflict resolution practitioner, and somehow through him and his colleagues, I learned about this job that was open with this restorative justice agency. And I applied for it, and I got it, and I was the administrative person for this office for a number of years. But I eased out of full-time work life into a part-time work life, and then eventually I left to pursue my art practice full-time. But it was great. I was 5 minutes from home. The commute was eliminated. The work was really interesting, and I think it shaped a lot of the ways I think about the world now.
Oh.
Well, we are in a very we live in a very punitive society where somebody has to be blamed for things all the time, and someone has to be found at fault. And restorative justice is more about, things happen and people make mistakes, but there's ways to work through that don't involve punishment or particular punishments or fault finding or blame finding. You can apologize, you can do retribution, you can restore people. You can restore the people who have committed a crime, and you can restore their victims if you can bring them together and have them talk to each other. I saw it happen over and over. I wasn't doing the work, but I was there as kind of a fly on the wall. I was, updating the website and writing the reports and, doing things like that. But I was exposed to a different way of thinking about things.
Were there any stories that you heard about that really affected you? Or did all of them in different ways?
They were all very powerful. From minor crimes, and this is what we did. We had criminal offenses that went through this process of being, often it involved a conversation between the victim and the offender. And it could be anything from a small incident that had just upset people to murders and terrible things. But the process was the same. Fundamentally, bringing people together to talk to each other and understand each other a little bit and apologize often and just sort of figure things out. Yeah, it was very powerful.
I would almost say, like some people do very political art or creative music or whatever. But in a way, it's so interesting to me. I was thinking about it. I saw an art show at the gallery in Vancouver. It was the Nike, it was a native fellow, I don't know his name. And he did native sculptures with Nike footwear and stuff, cutting it up. And when I first walked into it, I just almost couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
It was like, what? But it was very powerful because he was, and I think your work is kind of political in that way that most people wouldn't. Well, people may like birds, they're not looking at them in detail, and a lot
Well, we
about
take
birds.
them for granted, don't we? And if we're not careful, we won't have any, And where would our planet be without them? So I feel that my work is about that. It's about seeing these little creatures, sometimes things we might not even have thought of, and making them into something special that's worth noticing. Right?
So once you've had contact with whichever birds, do you research them and find out their story?
Often I do, yeah. If it's something I'm not familiar with, I know quite a lot now. I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
I've just absorbed a lot of knowledge about birds, right? But yeah, I'll do the research. I like to know what I'm working with. I like to know my subjects, right? Especially with art. The more I know, the more I can put into the piece of art, right? So.
Talk about your bird bath.
Oh, my bird bath. So I have this beautiful old stone bird bath, and it belonged to some good friends who, they sold their house. And they were just going to leave the bird bath behind. And I said, oh, please, can I have your bird bath? So I load this 500-pound bird bath into my car, and I managed to get it over to my place here on Mayne. And I set it up. And it's like this constant, it's like a watering hole in Africa. The birds, they come and go and come and go and come and go, and all different kinds. So I wait for them and I take their pictures, and I created a piece of art that showed all the birds I'd seen over a period of time at my bird bath, as if they'd all come there together. Of course, the deer come and drink there. It's a fabulous little sanctuary, like an oasis in the desert, for these animals. But the birds I was watching them this morning. I have a whole little family of nuthatches, which are teeny little bluish gray birds, tiny little things.
It's funny you say that.
And I've got 5 of them coming every day. They play in the bird bath and they feed at the suet feeder. And then the other day one landed on my shoulder, and I was very excited about that. But yeah,
any contact like that with any creature.
I'm just enjoying them in particular right now. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because I feed the birds and I have lots of birds. And the other day I saw a bird that sounds like that because it stood out to me because I hadn't seen one like it, and it's kind of bluish.
They're bluish. They're very tiny.
Okay.
And they're quite acrobatic. In fact, I've done a drawing of one, and he's hanging upside down, nibbling on a fir cone. And when I put it in, I printed it on cards, and people kept trying to turn it over. So the bird was the right way up, right? But they're very acrobatic little birds.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
right?
you see them. They climb up trees and they peck on things. They're not like a chickadee. They're more shaped like a woodpecker, but they're teeny little things. Really sweet, and they have a black stripe across their eye.
You also do work for people.
I do quite a bit of custom work. Yeah. I do.
Talk a bit about that.
I do portraits of people's animals. I started out, of course. Well, I started when I was a teenager doing it. I ran an ad in the local paper, and I was doing pet portraits, and I've done it ever since. And often they're very, very meaningful for people. They're often an animal that's no longer with them, and it's very emotional, or it's an animal that's not going to be with them very much longer. One of the favorite ones I've ever done was a couple of years ago for a woman who had 4 horses over the course of her life, all of them long-term relationships, and she wanted them all placed together as if they were standing together. Oh. And it was lovely to work on it. They were beautiful horses. Each one had a story, and that was a very moving project because it was very important to her. Yeah. She lives up in the interior, and during the year of the forest fires up there, when they were on evacuation alert all the time, she said, I had my painting that you did for me, and I had my bag. That's all I was going to take if I had to evacuate. Nice. And I thought, well, that is a lovely thing to tell me, right, about the work I've done. Yeah.
And your work, you must put a lot of time and energy into.
It's very time consuming. Yeah, it's not fast. I don't get paid by the hour. Too bad. But, it's piecework. So I get paid by the piece. But I don't care. I love doing it,
Have you got any new projects happening?
Well, I have quite a list of custom work right now.
Okay.
Years ago, when I was really getting serious about my art practice, I did a marketing program with this other group of artists. It was a self-directed thing, and we met once a week, and we talked about how we were going to make it big in the art world. And one night the question was, well, what would be your ideal scenario? And I said, I'd like a waiting list. Well, guess what? I've got one. Finally. So I have this whole list of custom work that I'm working my way through, and I've got a lot of ideas around some new work, featuring the birds from Maine mostly. Yeah, the things I see. Yeah.
Are you going to have showings here? I guess we can't have showings now, but.
Yeah, eventually.
Because you've done that in the past.
I had that show at Shavasana.
Yeah.
And last year I was going to do one again, but we know what happened last year.
And you've traveled the country.
I've shown my work all over the country. At one time I had galleries across the country, Calgary, Ottawa, and then I kind of pulled it all back in again. Yeah, but I don't show very far around anymore. I just do it
locally.
It's in my studio. There's a few little shops here and there that have things, and people find me online, right? Online's changed everything for artists, so, yeah.
Thank you for doing this, my dear.
You're welcome.
It was a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, too.
Yeah, nice way to end the day, I must say.
Good.
And thank you very much for joining us on After Hours, and thank you, Deborah Strong, not Storm. Second time today. And thank you, Mayne, for letting us do this.